Questions for starters. 16, absolutely. What's that?
It would raise all the classes' total utility significantly if we just said screw it and launched the terminal today.
You can do that on your own time. If it was live right now, I'd say yes, but sorry.
So during the macro test.
Yeah, that's a different ballgame.
No. I'm holding you to that.
Oh, different class. Okay, so let's see. What am I trying to find? 9. Homework.
I would true. I would too. Don't get me wrong.
I went into the appendix. All right, so give me the gist of your angst.
My angst is that I did chapter 10 homework last night before I did chapter 9.
Well, you're not, for being such a smart guy, you weren't too smart on doing that.
They were supposed to give me credit for chapter 9 with that registering on the chapter 6 homework. I was like,
trying to play dumb and just be like, oops.
All right, 16. Suppose a monopolist seller is a seller of flux capacitors.
That was awesome.
Faces the inverse demand curve, and that the monopolist can produce flux capacitors at a constant marginal cost of 5. How many will they sell? Okay, so any particular part of this problem, or which one? C and D.
What's a flux capacitor?
How many units will the flux capacitor? You know what that is, right? Okay. I didn't know. That's my era of high school, so even though it's a classic, I thought. How many units will a profit-maximizing monopolist sell when the price ceiling is in place, and at what price? Okay. So, go ahead.
I forgot to answer back though. I did B, but can I look at it too?
Sure.
That's about the marginal revenue with the price ceiling.
Oh, yeah, that gets kind of funky looking.
Is it constant at $6 until until a certain point?
Let's answer your question with everyone thinking. Is it constant till a certain point? But why?
Because then, when they reach a certain point, the demand they won't sell any at $6. They'll drop it down even below the price of
Yes. So basically, what does that demand curve look like when the ceiling is effective? When we're effectively in the ceiling range, what does that demand curve look like? Perfect competition, right? So then you get the exact same results that we got with perfect competition. So our representative firm, demand equals marginal revenue equals price, we get that flat. So it's really no different. So what you always want to be thinking about with these problems once we start to put in policy is what is the effective demand curve given the policy? So whether there's a quota in place, or if there's a price ceiling, or there's some other garbage of whether it's a tax or any other policy, kind of think about what the effective policy is along the production lines. Remember, this is your choice variable here along the horizontal axis. So that's the one you want to be sensitive to. So if the big demand curve looks like this, capped or has a price ceiling in place, then you have no choice by law but to keep it like that. Now, the properties of the marginal revenue function remain. Graphs here, then some sort of marginal revenue curve would look like this. Now, the relevant marginal revenue function then is right here. So that marginal revenue function is discontinuous as well. Again, marginal revenue equals price equals demand up here. So the blue line, oh, that's not blue. I put in a different color in there. My blue line here represents marginal revenue, and then it goes like this. So all of these things kind of follow suit, and your anchoring point is quantity that changes where the breakpoints are. Okay.
Messed me up. I think the chapter 10 homework, because then I was like, wait, marginal revenue.
Well, yeah, chapter 10 gets more complex than what.
I was like, marginal revenue for that 69, that should be 5.5, because he can still charge the 6.
Right.
Oh wait, no.
And so,
that's wrong.
you know, Matt, when we get into equations, so that's your graphing goggles, which you should need to have your graphing goggles on good and tight and understand what's going on there. But when you get your equation goggles on now, you've got two functions that don't tie together. It's like it's either this, so then you're writing a discontinuous function essentially. If we think of quantity as some function of prices, the inverse demand curve, then you've got something that now looks like this. Quantity is this, whatever, what price was it? Or did they have a price? What was the price ceiling set at? 6. So the quantity equals price, or whatever the function is, over Q2, you know, whatever, if this is 100, over this range, and then it equals whatever our marginal revenue function is, blah, 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 over this range. So this is how you start to write out the functional forms when it's a break deal.
So then, on that, I asked like what the marginal revenue would be, the 69th unit, and that's like past, like the 69th one is, yes, you plug it back into the original.
Yep, then you go back into that function. And that's why it's kind of helpful to have your graphing goggles on, because then you can see, okay, what am I dealing with? I'm dealing with this function, not this function, and then you know whether to come up or down. Okay? Digging into the details. All right, so does that pretty much answer your question for that one?
For B, but then I just say a B still.
Okay, so C. Oops. Did not mark my page. Okay, so then C was how many units will a profit maximizing monopolist sell when the price ceiling is in place and at what price? Okay, so I guess I can kind of was at $5, right? So depending on where you hit, and I don't know if this is really drawn to scale or not, but so you guys might need to help me out here, but if marginal cost is here at 5, dip into this region, I'm guessing, or not?
I just
We
know
use the price ceiling up to
How'd you guys do it?
I know the, like, because the price ceiling goes up until like the 68th unit, and then on the 69th unit, you go back to the marginal revenue period, and it's like negative.
Oh, okay. Since marginal revenue exceeds marginal costs, right, will not sell the 69. So basically, they stayed constant. But you had no intersection point is the problem, right? So this is one of those ones that you have to analyze case by case. So on this picture, so I guess my picture's not too inaccurate actually of what went on. So marginal cost equals marginal revenue, that doesn't happen, right? We've got a constant marginal cost of $5. We've got a constant marginal revenue of 6. But we do know this, if marginal revenue exceeds marginal cost, do you produce that unit? Yes. Next unit, if marginal revenue exceeds marginal cost, do you produce that unit? Yes. Next unit, marginal revenue exceeds marginal cost, do you produce that unit? Yes, 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 yes. You keep saying yes until you run out, and you run out once you, at the ceiling price, all of a sudden revenue drops down to here, and now revenue is less than the cost, so don't do it. And that was at that 69th unit for this problem. Then so all of a sudden you drop down to here. So if you were to, I guess, draw this continuously, you'd end at the 68th unit. and then you'd have kind of an open circle here for the 69. So, okay. Did that take care of that whole problem then? Or was there any part on D? Okay. All right. Challenging question. Yeah. Anytime we start getting multiple things, it starts to get more challenging. You can see this wasn't as easy as set two equations equal to each other. Now all of a sudden you're really thinking, but what's key thing here? Do you have to be the greatest mathematician in the world to solve this? No, you need principles of economics, right? That's why I'm emphasizing that. To solve this one out, you kind of have to use, it's a blend of math and logic and intuition of economic reasoning. Yeah?
So in this case, the ceiling actually improved social welfare?
Good question. I don't know the answer to that.
Part D.
So social, is that what part D was? Okay, what was the answer?
Well,
The price ceiling indeed reduces the deadweight loss.
deadweight loss.
Yeah. Yep. Over with a little bit of a graph here. Let me give you a basic monopoly. It's still related to this problem, but I mean, this is all this problem was here's the optimal quantity. Monopolist charges a high price, much greater than marginal cost, and reduces the quantity. And so the deadweight loss is this triangle because marginal benefit equals marginal cost. That's society's. To put price controls on the monopoly, all we're really doing is starting to move this quantity over. Because now marginal revenue is not here, but marginal revenue is here, and it's always greater than marginal cost. So we're just forcing that monopolist to keep ramping up. And as we're doing that, we're getting more provided to society. So we're getting closer and closer to the allocatively efficient quantity. If we set the price control at marginal cost exactly, we would be at society's allocatively efficient quantity. Now that sounds great, and a lot of government regulators would say, yeah, let's do that. That sounds perfect. But the flaw in the logic there is, A, we've assumed a constant marginal cost curve. B, we don't really know how that business changes from day to day and how marginal costs might evolve over time. So by the time even a government regulation gets passed or put in place, the marketplace has changed. And quite frankly, the monopolists might still be enjoying more monopoly profits if they've innovated a way to bring marginal costs down, right? So it's always chasing and likely to be ineffective. There might be some other creative ways to take care of the monopoly. Because remember, we're all of us good free market people are anti-monopoly. So don't get me wrong. That's one thing you could do if you get put into a circumstance where there's a monopolist, and maybe that's one policy to look at. But there might be other ways. Break up the monopoly, add competition. You know, we're always thinking about how do we bring a competitor to the market, because then that's going to naturally get us to an efficient solution that's sustainable over the long run once we enter competition or bring in competition. Okay. Good. Anybody else on this homework? Yeah. Rock. All right. You know me, I love my rocking the econ, Russ Econ rocks. All right, anything else on that one? All right, let's have you turn those in.
Can I just turn in the notebook real quick rather than printing it out?
No.
Are you checking today?
I check every day.
Well, I'm saying.
Sometimes I like to look in more detail. You know, the other times where we're trying to just expedite getting them back to you because of the exam, that's a different story. So yes. I may even take off for some sloppy shortcut work or something. Okay. Got to keep you guys honest. I understand this incentive business. There might be other things that take you away from intermediate micro, and that's fine. But there's a cost to it. There's a price to it. We got to have a price. Is that right?
You know what? Today the key word is deception. Did you hear about the NCAA online boss button?
Oh yeah. No, I've been.
Told our boss about that.
Yeah, in management class, and yeah, I learned about the boss button like I think it was 2 years ago or something, but probably when they started doing the streaming. But yeah, it's pretty click. Goes to a spreadsheet, some sort of bogus.
Yeah, now it's pretty much Microsoft Office, and you have like this fully written email and everything that it looks like you've done.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Also,
pretty clever.
they recommended you have a headset on to make it look like you're on a important business call. I'm trying to think what else.
Yeah, the data on how many hours are taken away from productive things is kind of mind-boggling. I can't remember the data off the top of my head, but
Last year you had a thing of like 2 years.
there's some things that are expressed in millions of dollars, and there's other things that are expressed in hours.
So is that a shift left in the labor supply? Compared to labor supply?
It could be partially something to do with the markets, yes.
Oh wait, that's 11 o'clock.
All right.
My bad.
10-1. So a firm with market power faces an inverse demand curve for its product. Assume that the firm faces marginal cost. So part A is Chapter 9. If the firm cannot price discriminate, what is the profit maximizing level of output? Part B, if the firm cannot price discriminate, what are the levels of consumer and producer surplus in the market, assuming the market, the firm maximizes profit and calculate deadweight loss? If the firm has the ability to perfectly price discriminate, what's the firm's output? All right, so go. Hopefully this should be fresh right off the top of your mind here. Marginal cost equals marginal revenue. Looks like my black markers here. Ooh, trip to the bookstore. Okay, so price equals 100 Q. So, what do we get here? Q equals 3. Price equals 70. Everybody get that? Get this by setting equation, let's call this 1, 2, and 3. Equation 1 equals 2, solve for Q. substitute Q back into equation 1. So Q into 1. To your picture. Everybody okay on Q equal 3? Q equal 70? All right. So you can draw a somewhat generic graph if you want, and kind of fill in the blanks. Get something like this. That'll allow us then to put the surpluses together. Okay, so you can see throughout the whole course we're not going to get away from consumer and producer surplus because a lot of higher level stuff is analyzing the impact to consumers and producers. Economists, at least a large part of what economists do, are analyzing impacts on people, marginal impacts, and that gets into distribution issues. So the standard monopoly model, consumers surplus. Consumers are buying a product at a price of 70, and they're buying 3 units. So the difference between what the consumer is willing to pay and what they actually pay gives us this upper triangle. Just like in principles class, I strongly recommend you to do what we did before. Start from left to right and work your way. It's not always a triangle. It's not always a rectangle. It can be a trapezoid. It can be some weird areas. And so we're going to get into some weirdness later, so I want that to give you that little reminder. Don't just remember that it's always this upper triangle. Tell yourself the story is for the first unit, somebody out there was willing to pay this amount, they only paid 70. Willing, actual, willing, actual, willing, actual. Yep, it ends up being this triangular region here is our consumer surplus. And maybe we can follow suit with it, area A. Call that an A. Maybe call this area B, area C, area D. So thinking about it that way, consumer surplus area is A. Producer surplus area is what? B and C? B and C, yeah, don't forget the difference between what the producer actually receives and the minimum amount they must receive, the marginal cost. For every unit that they produce, which is 3, so B and C represent producer surplus. I want all you guys to make sure you catch up to, you got everybody, all the areas lettered? Okay, letter all of your areas. Make sure you're there. And of course you could put B and E, you know, it doesn't matter. If you wanted to allow the marginal revenue to carve up extra areas, I don't care to go from A to double Z if you want, but whatever you need to do, but start to get in the habit of identifying those areas visually that way. Yeah. Oh. Okay, so we got some areas. 45 sounds good. Producers. 30 times 3 is 90. 30 times 3 is 90. Divided by 2 is 45. 90 plus 45 is 135. Okay, the dollar value measure of welfare, so don't forget to put your labels that reminding yourself that it's a dollar. Sometimes we stay in geometric shapes, but at the end of the day, these surpluses are the dollar value measure of welfare. Okay, and then what do we got? Deadweight loss equals area D. What'd you get on that one? How much? 45. Everybody get that? Not right. He's rescinding. What do you got? How much? 2250, which is half of 45, so you might have been on to something maybe. All right, 2250.
How do we know what numbers that have where marginal cost equals demand?
Good question. Curtis, how'd you do it?
Found what were marginal costs and demand equal to each other.
Good.
So it was at 4.5.
Yep.
And then you just take 70 minus 40 is 30, and 4.5 minus 3 is 1.5. Multiply them together, divide by 2.
Yep. So there's a couple ways. I mean, you could also, if I understood you right, you didn't do it this way, did you? You didn't cut this in half. Do that too if you want to deal with right triangles. If that, just if you're freaking out on a test or something. Marginal cost equals demand. You could solve for that. That equals some number over here, and you could cut it in half. Okay. But otherwise, you did 1/2 of, what was your numbers? 30
30 and 1.5.
times 1.5. So there's your 45 divided by 2, 2250. So the 1.5 is right here. Okay, well that was actually helpful moving into part C. If the firm can, is everybody okay with where we're at, identifying all those areas? Okay. Yeah? Some head shaking. Okay, good. If the firm has the ability to perfectly price discriminate, what is the firm's output? Perfect price discrimination. 4.5, yeah. So that's why that kind of helped us out. So the key to perfect price discrimination, again, we did last time, that's what we worked out on the board, is that with perfect price discrimination, you're selling every unit for the highest price people are willing to ever pay. You're not into the single price thing. And so the demand curve is the marginal revenue curve with perfect price discrimination. So demand equals marginal revenue. But be careful if you write this down that you put with perfect price discrimination. I guess we'll call it PD. Perfect price discrimination. Those two things are one and the same. And we already solved it to be 4.5. So that tells us the firm's output. If the firm practices perfect price discrimination, part D, what are the levels of consumer and producer surplus? What is the deadweight loss? Deadweight loss is 0. Good. And consumer surplus is 0. Right. So don't start doing, oh, that's the price, and then we're back to what it is in competition. The monopolist has extracted all consumer surplus, which makes them sound like bad guys, but really the story is the consumers paid the price they were willing and able to pay. All right, so questions on that. So part D is deadweight loss is 0, consumer surplus is 0, and producer surplus is the whole thing. A plus B plus C plus D. Which shows us the motivation for businesses to try to come up with price discrimination schemes. And that's what we're going to spend some time on in chapter 10 is on various pricing. Now, I think we went over a couple thoughts of price discrimination. I told you I had a kind of interesting example I just ran into. Our MIS professor just recently left to go work in the private sector. And I had met him last week or 2 weeks ago and learned that he is working in Rantoul at an aviation place. Has anybody been to Rantoul? Little tiny. If you blink, you miss it. Kind of run down, and then if you go on, if you go on the county road, you come to this place where there's a bunch of airplanes everywhere. So there's this basically aviation junkyard essentially.
Yeah. It's right over by us1, isn't it?
I don't know the geography over there. I don't think so. I mean,
tested on our choir tour actually, and I was like, is this like some museum?
It's kind of just sticks out at you.
Yeah.
You know, it helps that you're in Rantoul. There's no zoning requirements, so there's planes laying all over, plane parts, and so what they do, they've got kind of a niche market where they sell used airplane parts to people around the world. Sometimes airplane parts for old airplanes are hard to come by. You can imagine it's not like running your own car junkyard where there's a lot more volume. We're talking about airplanes. So somewhat rare it sounds like to have this. And so he was explaining that their salespeople, because I don't know if I asked him or if he volunteered, but you know me, I probably asked. I said, so, you know, how do they price this stuff? And they kind of case-by-case basis price it on the phone when they're talking to people. So you can imagine they're talking, they say, hey, we need this part off of a Cessna, and through the course of conversation, the salesperson there tries to get the highest price they can. Just pure negotiation, right? Pure negotiation. And so depending on how good a negotiator they are, but you can imagine if you have a 1975 Cessna airplane and you need this part and you've been scouring the country to get this stupid part, and brand new maybe from Cessna it's $5,000, there's a lot of room for a used part that's in decent shape. And so the salespeople there are pretty highly skilled. You're not just hiring college kids. I mean, these guys know how to sell, right? You got to know how to kind of fish out people's willingness to pay. Because I asked him, I said, well, these people are probably pretty skilled. And he's like, oh, yeah, they're good. And, you know, part of their pay is then based on how well they do on the sales. They probably have a marginal cost of next to nothing if they picked up a trash plane that they have sitting out in the yard out in Rantoul. So their carrying costs and other things are probably pretty low. So it's pretty much all profit in that regard at the margin, because their variable cost of operating are probably fairly low. So. Yeah, I think when there's plane crashes or whatever, they just haul them off to Rantoul. I'm sure these guys probably have to go to crash sites and you know, take away. Maybe they clean. I don't know all of what their business is, but I thought it was very interesting and definitely a situation where they're able to price discriminate. Think about what happens as if there was more competitors. You wouldn't be able to do that. I mean, the prices would be online. They'd hit a couple websites. These type of Rantoul junkyard places would just compete with each other, right? So there's asymmetric information where the Rantoul guys got all the information and they're left with the consumer with a high willingness to pay. And do people who own planes, how about income levels? Are they low income people usually? No, probably pretty high. Ooh, that's the next fair point.
Who was it?
It's urgent, you can take the pause.
It's NCAA basketball related, but I can wait till after class. So.
No, that's urgent. Did you place
So-
a bet on something?
No, I'm not too good on that, but I did do some brackets, but just some buddies that
Vegas.
we've always
Go
gotten
Vegas.
together. Once we start to enter in competition, all of that monopoly power goes away. But these guys definitely have some market power in this particular situation. So, and then they might have it for a while. So yeah, airplane owners, typically high income, money's not really an object probably for the most part. I mean, a lot of people are on a budget still, but if they got to pay it, they got to pay it. So kind of an interesting situation where they can do some price discrimination. All right, questions or comments on that? Field trip to Rantoul. That is not the most glamorous field trip, although it does sound kind of interesting. Maybe we could talk to their, have them come in. What's that? Have you actually kind of toured around the place, or have you gone there
You
before?
literally see everything from the road.
Yeah, I know, just about, yeah.
I've been out there a lot because it's like on the way to the drive-in. So
Drive-in theater?
Yeah.
Where?
So,
Oh, okay. Oh, so it is on the way to Osawatomie. I don't have any clue where Osawatomie is, but
We have one of those.
the bike trip.
We've got one
that
in
goes all the way
KC.
to
It goes all the
that.
way also on.
KC,
Oh, does it
what's
really?
up?
Okay.
There's still like two. There's the I-70 drive-in, and then there's the Southwest Boulevard drive-in.
Okay, so you manage a hair salon that has two locations, one in a large city in Ohio with several competing salons, and another in a small city in Pennsylvania with less competition. In Ohio, your customer's price elasticity of demand is 3, while for your Pennsylvania customers, it's 2. Assuming that the marginal cost of producing a haircut is $30, regardless of location, what are your salon's optimal markups and prices in each location? Optimal markups
So,
and prices
are we
in
doing the
each
Lerner Index
location.
now? Is that
Yes.
I did
So,
homework on it.
yeah, you did the homework already, so you're one step up. So what's the idea? I kind of posed this problem. I didn't want to really jump into it right away. But I wanted to at least pose a problem as we work through some things. What's the idea of the markup?
How much you're going to charge over cost?
Okay, how much you're going to charge over cost. Now, that's not the way it's used here explicitly. That's one thing I wanted to bring up right away, because if you look at the formula for this markup business, it is not that.
Here it's marking it over the other.
Over, you're putting your price down. So it's how much additional you're going up over.
Correct.
Well, you're putting your new price in the denominator. Anyway, we'll derive it here in a second, but it's a little bit different. So I think I was deciding on whether to derive the formula or not. Page 364 of your textbook has the proof of where this came from. And I'll walk through maybe a little bit of it. I mean, they do. I can just sit up here and copy what they do. But it starts from the concept of marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So this is where it starts from. And they start to build a case, well, how does marginal revenue change? So if you take marginal revenue and think of it as your price plus, and this was derived earlier, the change in price over the change in quantity is another way to express marginal revenue. Times quantity, right, equals marginal cost. So at the end of the day, this is my little circle, you can see your textbook, you get this formula. of doing a little bit of manipulation, 1 over or equals the elasticity of demand. So mind that there's a negative sign here. And this is something that is very useful for pricing. That's often not used in the real world business for a couple of good reasons, but also some reasons that can help in general. Yes?
Is that negative sign, -1? Is that negative from the elasticity?
It offsets that. That's why it's there.
So it ended up being positive.
So you end up being positive, yes. Yep. So when you read that problem, which city has a more elastic demand? Which city has a more elastic demand? Ohio, right? So we've got Ohio at 3, and what was the other state? Pennsylvania at 2. So what's your gut feeling saying on which one should be priced higher, just given that information? Pennsylvania, good. Why? Yes. So if we're drawing Ohio and Pennsylvania, and we think about a demand curve, one of them's going to be steeper and which one's going to be flatter, and which is which? Which one's flatter, which one's steeper? Steeper. So let me just be a little obnoxious about it and say that that's demand curves. Now, I also just want to point out that if this is a demand curve, just a single demand curve, this could be happening along one, just thinking about the where we're at on the demand curve. So I don't want you to totally think this way necessarily, but I don't want you to forget that if the elasticity of demand is equal to 2 in absolute value here at a quantity of 100 haircuts, then it might be 3 here. The same demand curve, the elasticity changes along it. That's all I wanted to point out, is just to remember that. And that's important because as you start to change price, you're moving to a different part of your demand curve. So if you run a sale, you are changing the elasticity. You're moving to a different point on demand, which could then change the circumstances. So just wanted you not to forget this part here. And then also, just as a little FYI, it's good to keep this graph in mind too. Total revenue, quantity, always. You guys should be able to kick that one out at any time this semester. That one helps a lot. Okay. So back to this then. If marginal costs are constant at $30, no matter where, maybe I'll use some red here. No matter where we're producing, that wasn't the most perfect horizontal line, we start to see the economic logic pop out at us now. So in this market, you just treat differently. So some marginal revenue curve would come down here. I maximize profit in Ohio by producing this many in Ohio and charging this price. And I maximize utility or profits in Pennsylvania by producing QP and charging this price. That's kind of where we're going with this stuff. So that's how elasticity ties in. So what's been done neat here was there was a mathematical manipulation of the basic profit maximizing condition, MR equals MC, which we all know and love. We just did a little manipulation, all legal manipulations, and was able to derive this concept. And this one you can more easily speak to CEOs, bosses, and owners of businesses with. They kind of get this, right? They kind of get this. And if they know their marginal cost, and we're trying to find out what the best price is, because we're a price maker, not a price taker, we have market power, our choice variable is price now. We got one more variable to knock out. Let's hire an economist to, and maybe we don't need an economist, to estimate the elasticity of demand. We might even be able to go into some trade journals. If I'm a restaurant business trying to figure out what the price of a T-bone steak should be at my restaurant in Kansas City, Kansas, there might be some economist or some food studies, some egg economist that's done a little bit of work on something. Who knows? Some restaurant business, they came up with the elasticity of demand approximately equal to blah, right? And now you've got, I know what it takes for me to make a steak. I know what the elasticity of demand is. I can solve for the price.
Would you be able to solve for the elasticity of demand? Like, would you be going the other way around if you have price and marginal cost?
Yes, but by doing that, we got to make sure if I picked the price, is that really the elasticity? So we've got the problem, you're kind of doing a little chicken and egg thing.
Yeah.
The real demand curves out there, we typically want that revealed to us through the underlying fundamentals of demand. What's the income, population, blah, 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 all the things that locate this curve, and then we're going to charge the highest price possible. If we start saying, oh, let's try a price of $12, we don't know if we're on the demand curve or not. And so now if you try to backdoor it, if I understood your question right, we shove a 12 in here, a 12, and it's a $6 marginal cost. That's the elasticity of demand. No, you kind of, it wasn't the right causal chain of figuring out what's driving what. Okay? So we've got these underlying fundamentals of demand that establish what the true demand curve is. If we can be clever, and hopefully the economists did all the right stuff to estimate the elasticity of demand, now we can say, what's the highest price I can charge? The profit maximizing price, because all of this was derived from that. So that's pretty cool, pretty powerful. All right, so for this problem, let's see what happens. So go ahead and work through. Just a little simple math. You guys know this, and you know this for Ohio and Pennsylvania. Figure out P. Any firms that have market power. Yep. Yeah, so this is a little more generic. In fact, I think this whole chapter is called like pricing and market power, or market power and pricing. So yeah, it's kind of outside monopoly, which is good. That's why the state business is relevant. That's a monopolistically competitive firm. Okay. What'd you guys get for steaks in Ohio? Haircuts in Ohio. $45. Okay, so solve for P. Here's all the pieces of the puzzle. I'll let you work out your algebra on your own. P equals 45. Pennsylvania, 60. P minus 30. So if we call this PP for Pennsylvania and PO for Ohio. So we got PP equals -1 over -2. our Pennsylvania pricing ends up being 60. Back up to this diagram. Graphically, we'd be thinking of that being 60 and this one being 45. That's one of the most common questions real-world businesses want to know. What should I do? How should I price my goods? So that's why it's nice to see this textbook, because this is something that separates this textbook from other ones. Using some real-world analysis, Steve Levitt talked about doing his consulting, and maybe we saw that in some of the videos we looked at too, but he did some consulting for businesses and department stores on what do we price these clothes at. So they had specific, he was given a challenge. It's kind of an interesting story, and it was the most profitable unit for it was like Dayton Hudson or some major department store applying some econ like this. All right, so spring break is upon us.
Peace out.
So, you know the routine. I won't have them due right after spring break, but Wednesday we'll have chapter 10 homework due, so feel free to get a head start.
Oh yeah.
Better yet, maybe even better might be just to do your reading. I mean, the book, so another point here, this chapter is probably the first chapter we got to where it's really going to be some different material. So it's more important to read through it than some of the other ones maybe, or it's just going to be a little more different. Oh yeah, Cadence is giving me a reminder of the rust busted. So get